really awesome video game stuff. I love it. All right, I'm Lachlan, publicist for Dark Horse, and with me today we have an amazing panel of talent on loan from a number of different studios. To my left, and just going down the line, we have our associate editor, Ian Tucker, who handles a lot of our video game art books and comics. And we have on loan from DICE, Mr. Robert Senlin, who will be working on Battlefield 1. And then down the line, we have Frank O'Connor from 343 Studios / Halo. Mr. Joseph Spadek, who is on loan from Recore. Who's excited for that one? Rob Simpson, previously from Dark Horse, and now over at Blizzard. So, we're here to talk about and then we have Mr. Don, who is Don Brown, excuse me, who is going to be discussing a number of things.
We practiced that.
I know, we talked about it. I can't do all names. I only bat, a few. We'll be talking about some things from BioWare, and then down on the end, we got Jason Lundell, who's going to talk about some zombie Call of Duty stuff.
Yeah.
Woo! All right. Ian.
All right. I don't have a I think it's probably fair to say that most everybody here is an avid gamer. And I'm sure that's the same for everybody on the panel too. How did each of you get into the industry? We'll start with Robert.
I actually got into the industry by a reference program.
Okay.
It was suggested I should do video game concept art because I did normal illustration, I did work for magazines, CD covers, trying to make a living as a freelancer whilst driving the Stockholm subway. So I just buckled down, did a portfolio, sent it to Avalanche Studios, and got hired.
Cool.
Then went into that.
I killed the Stone's identity. I actually started working in video game magazines back in very early 90s, like 92 in the UK. I worked for a company called Future Publishing. And I've worked on video game magazines for a long time and then moved into the industry proper.
I played video games, honestly. I played a game called Myth 2, made by a company called Bungie, and ended up getting in a clan with the guys who worked on it, and they needed a guy to come do their international publishing, licensing, localization, and they hired me to do it, and that's how I got in.
I got to video games, I guess, in sort of a circular way. I actually started out in comics publishing. Started in Marvel Comics back in 1982 when I was 16, probably violating all kinds of child labor laws. And stayed in comics, worked at DC Comics, various different places, worked at Dark Horse. And then after Dark Horse, worked at EA, editing their comic book. And from EA, then worked at Tryon, editing their comics, and at Trade Game Games, which is a game company over in Germany, editing their comics-based stuff, and now over at Blizzard.
I was doing some film and screenwriting in Hollywood and LA, and thought games might be more fun to make. And really just applied the old-fashioned way, got a job at a real-time strategy company, and then applied to BioWare, loved them, and that was that. I falsified my age and started building computers, and they let me in that way. And then I said, "Oh, can I be a programmer for you? I do programming." And they said no. And I said, "Well, I'm an artist as well. I can use 3D Studio." And they said, "Oh, you're hired." So I got in as an artist because you wouldn't employ a 15-year-old programmer. So that's how I got it.
All right, we got a hard one for you. Top 3 games of all time. Jason, let's start with you.
Cool. Top 3 games. Okay, so I'll reference the MSX computer, which is an old computer, Japanese computer, and on that was a game called Elite, which there's the new version of it out these days, but back in the day it was made to all fit in 64K of main memory, and it had unlimited galaxies and planets and all this other fun stuff, so that's one of my top games. Second one, I would use this game called Nemesis, which in America I think is called Gradius. And that was just the idea of a really kind of complex and fun game being made from very simple blocks, and that kind of fascinated me, so that was incredible. And to go the other end of the spectrum, I then have to call Final Fantasy now. I'll say no specific one, but that might show my age a little bit. But Final Fantasy was amazing on the fact that the complexity of the RPG world, and I was really into my JRPGs at the time, so yeah, they're the three I would call.
I guess for me, there's an old company called Infocom's making text adventures, which they did one called Lurking Horror, I think. It was Lovecraft on the MIT campus. I don't know why it stuck with me, but text adventures showed me this idea of player agency and choice and branching narrative, which would later play into my career at BioWare. I always loved Bioshock, the first one. I thought that did an amazing job of showing how very complicated themes can actually still express themselves in video games. You don't really see, all these political ideas in games, but I thought Bioshock did that really well. And then more recently, I still am in love with Skyrim. I think they did that game really nailed open world in a way no one had. So,
I guess I go back to another text-based one and say Hitchhiker's Guide. Yeah, right. Not only for embodying that series of novels so well, but for diverging from that series of novels so well. I mean, it was one of those first adaptations that challenged you by purposely not doing what was in the book. So, reading the book helped, but it didn't actually just help you solve the game.
one of the funniest games.
And one of the funniest games, other than that, I'd say Soul Calibur, maybe on the Dreamcast, again, more for showing what the Dreamcast could do than the game itself, although I love the game as well. And a good third one. Can I name my own company?
Go ahead.
Wow, World of Warcraft. I mean, I've been playing that for years and love myself.
Well, for me, I have to go, and I know we talked a little bit about your favorite games, I know it's a different ones too. But Dig Dug, because that got me into the arcade when I was little and kept me there for far too long. And then I'll say Monkey Island, because it's the first game that I played that made me laugh. And that's something I really enjoy, not just in games, but literature and movies as well. It's a good comedy. And the next one, if I had to pick one, I'd probably say Warcraft 2, because it was the first game that I played competitively with my friends, and it really opened up to me the world of what that felt like to be playing with friends competitively, and that led to a lot of different other games. But those would be my three.
I mean, I grew up in when arcades weren't just the place to go to buy crack, so I played a lot of arcade games.
They still are.
Well, I don't know. But I was going to say Moon Patrol, I was going to switch it up, because the Elite reference reminded me of a very similar game called Mercenary back in the day. It was on 8-bit systems and vector graphics like Elite. But like normally in the sky, it would sort of procedurally generate worlds with buildings and stuff. And the game itself was good, but it was more about exploring this big sci-fi universe. Then Marble Madness was a no-brainer. That game, I still can remember every note of every tune in that game. And I would say probably Star Wars Arcade. Again, I don't know if Vector can be like Vector games.
It's a super difficult question, but if I would pick games that I constantly go back to playing, it would be Grim Fandango. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I just go back to it constantly. Being remastered as an HD one, which is bliss. Red Dead Redemption. I still go back to that one once a month just to ride around a bit. And Bayonetta, definitely. That is my top favorite game of all time.
Excellent, thank you. With regard to world building, it's essential in a lot of entertainment. And we start most of our series by building a Bible. And obviously there's got to be that germ of an idea too. How do you find that that idea is hatched for each of your projects, your current projects or previous projects? And how do you build that idea from there to establish your lore and your canon, essentially? The birth of the idea and the development of the idea. Progress.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, time. We'll do that.
I mean, it is pretty tough considering what type of games we do, but if we just reference the latest one, Battlefield 1 was coming up, it's one of those games that we've been making, war games for quite a while, and when we sort of wanted to just move forward, we picked this era, and it's one of those games that's been in our heads for a long, long time, and it's been sort of years in the making in our heads before we actually got around to doing it. And yeah, I mean, building from that world, you can just cherry pick so much from this era because it's so unknown. There's so many things and so many preconceptions about this Great World War that people didn't know about. So we didn't have to make anything up. We could just cherry pick from all the weirdness and the fantastical stuff.
I've been fortunate to have a very large body of existing canon to work with from Eric Nyland and from Joe Staten, as a matter of fact. And so we've sort of grown from those seeds and germinated from those seeds. But we also looked at the game and let the game drive a lot of that. What can we build next time around? What kind of game features can we add? And sort of fill the worlds that way. But we also have a huge extended universe of canon that we use just to kind of illustrate the backdrop of the universe that we're building into novels, and of course graphic novel helps us tell stories and helps us make a more believable world with real characters.
Yeah, I'd say the work that I do now on the Microsoft first-party publishing team, we do basically all new IP. So I found over the years that when you're working on something new, it doesn't make a lot of sense to try to write a story level right off the bat. You'll canonize something, and the next day a designer and artist will throw it out and call it something different or paint it a different color, and you have to change everything anyway. So a lot of what we do is now with the Art of Report, which is coming out, the game is essentially done. It was done enough that I felt okay going to the guys at Dark Horse and saying, so this isn't going to change. Like, this is canon. This is part of the real lore. You can put it in the book and we'll stick to it. But it's just different, I think, with established franchises versus new IP, how you want to approach that. And I would just say that Battlefield 1942 almost made my top 3 list because that game sucked so much of my time and it was awesome.
Well, again, at Blizzard, we're in a happy position to be working with a property that's been around for 25 years in World of Warcraft and has a very deep, rich backstory and set of lore to draw on. So doing new stories for that is actually a lot of fun because we can either try and flesh out an idea that's already been explored or fill in pieces of the lore that's only been briefly touched on. One of the fun aspects of working on this series of books, the World of Warcraft Chronicles series, is that this is designed to tell the history of Azeroth and of the characters in World of Warcraft from 10,000 years ago to now. So it's our chance to really walk through the lore, take a good look at it, and really explain to everyone all the things that you've only had a small chance to touch on. With a game like Overwatch, we're in the happy position of designing something from the ground up. So it's a lot of very interactive conversations back and forth with all of the current game devs who are shaping that world. And we get to explore that in comics and in short cinematics and in other media. So.
Well, I've seen it both ways. On Mass Effect 3, we were sort of wrapping up the lore, and it was a planned trilogy, and then 3 was the end. And it wasn't really about introducing too many new elements, because it was a finale. On Mass Effect Andromeda, we are continuing the Mass Effect story, and that's been challenging because we want to still feel like Mass Effect, but it is an all-new story with all new characters. As far as the day-to-day building of lore, what I find, you don't actually want to set a room full of writers off writing the encyclopedia of lore on their own. That generally doesn't work. Joseph touched on it, because then the artist does something else and your lore's out the window. It's better to do a kind of, start filling in the blanks at a high level. Don't get too detailed yet. You don't want to actually commit to too many details too early, because in a way that limits you. If I say all the pistols in this game have to be yellow from day one, that really limits you to just yellow pistols, yellow guns the whole game. You don't want that. You want to organically grow the lore as you're working with artists and designers, and then by the end you kind of hope to put it all together, and you're trying to make sure all the lore is cooperating with each other. Certainly in Mass Effect we have really deep, rich lore that is a challenge in its own, just trying to make sure it all agrees with each other. So I'd say that's part of it too. Make sure your lore agrees with each other.
I suppose there's 2 aspects. For the Black Ops series, there's the campaign, which is this kind of story that we tell, and there's the zombie side of it. I'll start with the campaign. We start off with an attitude. So Black Ops really kind of brought the idea of like kind of F the man, kind of a bit edgy, a little bit less, rah-rah, more, jingless, more, okay, let's talk about an anti-hero, let's talk about someone who might not be doing stuff for the best of the kind of country at the time. So that's where Black Ops 1 came from, and talk about mind control and so forth. And so once we had worked that out and that was kind of working, we had this concept of, okay, that's man corrupts man. And so then when we went to Black Ops 2, it was then man corrupts machine. And then we went to the third one and said, okay, machine corrupts man. So once we started it, it then kind of wrote itself in terms of what the 3 parts would be for the campaign experience. And on the zombie side, so the way Zombies was kind of born was out of the kind of spare bits from a game called World at War, and we introduced the flamethrower for the first time. And so there was this animation that was like, oh, it was on fire, and that's where Zombies kind of came from. And because it was so ad hoc and so kind of made up in the lunch break, every kind of zombie map for the first, I don't know, 4 or 5 years was just made up each time, and certain threads were connected and other bits weren't. And so by the time that I kind of joined in, there was a rich backstory with lots of threads that some of them had purpose and were supposed to connect, and some of them were just kind of floating off in the wind. So it's actually been lots of fun to be able to kind of take them, attach them all together, and work it all out. So that's the kind of 2 strategies we use for kind of world building and setting our world in Call of Duty.
Cool. Shifting from the high level to more nuts and bolts. I'll use an example from comics. Typically scripting is handled by an individual and then realized by a penciler before the inker and colors all start to take part. Obviously, with video games, it's usually a much broader undertaking. If you could, each of you go into the technical process that each studio uses for writing the script and then realizing that both through concept art and eventual finished game in-game assets. Jason, if you could start with you, please.
That's such a mammoth question, by the way.
Sure.
I'll try and abbreviate it. So, Treyarch, which is where we make the Black Ops series, about 300 people in that building, all making the single product, one game. It's you start off with a very small group. Is the way we work, and that's normally the director, myself, the lead writer, and our art directors and so forth, kind of come together and talk about the mood, the vibe, certain things that are kind of interesting us, or certain stuff that we feel passionate about, based on possibly the last game or some other thing that we're kind of that's kind of moving us at the time. And then from there, it then goes through a very regimented process, which I won't bore you with because that can take hours, but it goes through this regimented process, but each one of those steps has a great kind of freedom for then change and flexibility. But one thing that's incredibly important to us is that, Call of Duty comes out on the day every time and never misses. And hence, what we have to do is make sure that, although there's the freedom and flexibility of all these creative individuals in different disciplines to kind of move and flex and speak to each other, there's also a structured system that allows it to kind of hit on quality, on content every single time. So to go any deeper, we'll need to kind of dominate this panel for the next couple of hours, so I'll stop there.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
At BioWare, using Mass Effect 3 as the example, we would get a vision from up top, and in Mass Effect 3 that wasn't hard. It's the war with the Reapers, it's the end of the trilogy. The idea at that point was, all right, think World War II, it's total war, it's the extinction of everything, we don't win it. At that point, it starts to filter down to the team. We have ultimately something like 12 writers in a game, when we're making something as big as, say, Mass 3. We then want to allow the freedom for those writers to pair up with designers, so each sort of mission in the game ends up with a pod, who's in charge of it. They also, we find we grow the story organically, just as it's a high-level vision handed down. We weren't prescribed all the details of the game. We were just told, think World War II with Reapers. We then start roughing out the structure, and then we say, okay, here, designer, writer team, artist team, cinematics guy, go dream up how awesome this particular mission is going to be, and that particular mission. And then they grow it the same way. So they come back with what we call razors, which is a very high-level Hollywood pitch, elevator pitch, we call it. 1 or 2 sentences, what's going to make this level awesome. And we'll churn on that for quite a while, because we want to get that right, because once we have it, we can start committing more and more resources. But we don't get too detailed until we start to really improve the razor, and then we work out the structure, and then everyone buys into it, and then you really start committing your money and the time and manpower to it. And that's when you get down into the details and the nitty-gritty of what makes a mission. And then that's happening concurrently across the whole game. Various pods are doing that, and then all these pieces start to line up into form the whole game.
As far as my specific job tasks go, I don't get directly involved in the game dev process, so I can't speak directly to that. What I can say is that at Blizzard, across the 5 different main properties that we have, Warcraft, StarCraft, Diablo, Overwatch, across each of them, there's a separate game team that, refer to by number, that will develop those games on their own sort of timeline. So we don't really pressure people to iterate, a new release every year, a new release every 2 years. They just sort of let the idea grow organically on their own game teams. But again, since I'm not directly involved in the game dev process, I can't speak to exactly how the games are hatched.
Sorry. No, that's fine. That's a great answer. Thank you.
Well, I mean, maybe just to add to what people had said, trying to repeat things on a game like Recore, since I work for Microsoft Publishing, we usually work with teams who come to us with a really strong idea and a strong pitch that we choose to fund or not. So in the case of Recore, that initial pitch was developed by a group of guys who made the Metroid Prime games. You guys have played those. And Keiji Inafune, who is one of the creatives behind Mega Man, really story Japanese game developer. So the pitch they came to us with was a story that was basically figured out at a high level, the big beats. And it was my job to help them flesh that out and help them turn that into a game story. And from there, depending on what we were working on, we went through a pretty traditional process. For the cinematics, we script them and we storyboard them and we create animatics, and then we go on to a perf-cap stage. So I think it really depends on the game for sure. But Recore is a great example of a world that we looked at and had characters that we instantly wanted to spend time with and already had a pretty great plan coming in.
I think on Halo, the process is not coincidentally probably pretty similar to Treyarch's in terms of scale and necessity of production values. So it starts with a small group, they discuss ideas with the art director and the creative director, and that gets whittled down in the narrative group, and then the narrative group starts building the game kind of in tandem with the rest of the process. Story is one of the first things that gets delivered, but as others will know, it's also one of the last things to get finished, because we keep tweaking it as things change within the game development process. But it's not like a movie. I think you can write an amazing script for a movie, deliver it, someone can make that verbatim, and you can have an excellent movie, and it just there's too many moving parts for that to be truly necessary.
Yeah, I entirely agree with what everyone so far has been saying. I'm not going to just echo everything, but I mean, we have different processes really for different titles. Battlefield is definitely one of those, just like Jason was saying, and Frank as well. It's like almost the exact same sort of process. Whereas Mirror's Edge that we did is a slightly different one. Whereas there's one main writer who does the entire thing, the entire world, the entire lore, and all that. But for Battlefield, it must have been sort of really digging around in history and sort of accounts from different soldiers in the era, and just finding all these unique and interesting bits that we can just cherry pick from and just go crazy with them and put a nice spin on it.
Cool. Let's talk about characters. Let's get more specific. So what do you look for when you're trying to build an interesting character? What are your goals that you set for yourselves? And what kind of pitfalls do you encounter as you're developing these characters, and what tactics do you use to overcome those pitfalls? Robert?
Well, that is a huge question.
So these are all pretty high.
When it comes to just people like Fate from Mirror's Edge games, that was sort of a really, really long process of just hammering something out. It's like all the sort of hallmarks of the iconic characters, so we shouldn't probably go into discussing that too much. It's been discussed before. Soldiers, for war games. I'm mainly working on it, just did some work on Mirror's Edge. It is pretty difficult sort of finding a nice sort of characteristic sort of soldier, especially when you're doing multiplayer games. So you have different classes, and you need to find these sort of archetypical designs and looks to them. And regarding pitfalls, is getting everything to be same. Like we want to have each soldier have their own unique personality, but still be part of a sort of bigger army and find these sort of common denominators throughout the whole.
Sort of build silhouettes, perhaps.
Yeah, and then find color schemes. And, well, start with sort of just say the battlefield one is nationality first. See if it's friend or enemy. Then go into just classes and find these characteristics and make them just sort of go through the whole span of the sort of this is the scout. You can identify him as
Cool. Thank you.
I think when you're making a first-person shooter, the number one challenge you have with characterizing people is that you can't, for example, have a lazy coward in a first-person shooter that's a controllable character, or a desirable controllable character. You could, there could be a classic lazy coward for sure. Sometimes in the very first Halo game, there really is only one character, and he's accompanied by an AI, and it was pretty easy to make kind of a friendship, contrasting their styles and their personalities. But by the time we get to Halo 4 and Halo 5, we've got a big universe. So what I try to do when I'm writing specific characters is just try and make them feel realistic, base them on real people, base them on either people I know or people that I'm familiar with in the media as a core, and sort of build out that. What does that mean when it's a scientist? What does that mean when it's a civilian? What does that mean when it's a soldier? But I think that people are always looking for resonance in characters and things that they recognize as at least as authentic as you can be in a sci-fi universe where everyone's more or less indestructible.
Sure. I always thought the main character in Halo was the gun, and you got any thoughts and feelings?
Well, it's up to you, sir. That's what it is now.
Okay. Maybe just to add on to what other people have talked about, and Recore specifically with Jewel, I think it's great to look at Faith in Mirror's Edge, because she was definitely a character that we looked very hard at in terms of a character done well, I think, for really well, actually, from a protagonist point of view. And certainly the look of the character, I know we're writers up here, but the look of the character is extremely important. I mean, the filters that I often put on, male or female character, honestly, is, hey, would I want to buy an action figure of this character? Would I want to cosplay as this character? Which is to say, is that iconography unique? Do they stand out amongst all other characters? Could I see them at Comic-Con and go, oh, I know exactly who that is, it's that character. And also, I think with female characters, especially now with all the churn of Gamergate and all these other things, I think we're all very careful in a way that we maybe weren't before to be very thoughtful when it comes to female characters in video games and make sure that above all else that they look capable and they're strong and they're aspirational, and would be a character that anybody would feel comfortable playing, man, woman, boy, or girl. So that's a really hard nut to crack, but it's certainly something we focused a lot on with Recore in the main character, Jewel.
I think one of the first things we look for when we're building characters is to build more. Frank was saying to try and find those things about the character that are identifiable to everybody. Try and make them anchored in genuine human emotions and genuine human aspirations and desires. Take a look at the characters in Overwatch. The way that those characters approach the world. The fun thing about Overwatch is that at the outset we decided to start with 21 different characters. That allows us 21 different perspectives on the human condition. So, no two characters are responding to the challenges of their stories the exact same way. And what we're trying to do there is really allow them to be sort of a touchstone for the way that we deal with today's challenges in modern world. So I think that's one of the main things we're looking for.
At BioWare, I think we're pretty well known for having what we call the squad mates. So you've got the guys you pick to go on missions with you, where you spend a lot of time in pre-production going through a lot of different pitches. Writers will start to come up with ideas and just start throwing pitches at the wall, and we're trying to find that unique thing that you haven't seen before. You spend a lot of time in the game with them. We have a history of becoming very beloved characters, everyone dressing up as. And what we essentially do is we figured out the thing that we think is going to pop. Each writer is assigned a specific character, and then they own that character. And they're responsible for writing that character's relationship arc throughout the whole game, which allows one writer's voice to really inform that character. And since multiple writers are doing this, it keeps everything feeling unique and distinct. The voices are very different. We all then work together on protagonists, for example, in the first trilogy, Shepard. We're all writing Commander Shepard. And if you look back, you'll find over across this trilogy, from Mass 1 to Mass 3, Shepard actually changed. Because initially on the protagonist, you've got 10 writers trying to figure out how to write him. And you start to figure it out in 1, and by 2 you get a better handle, and by 3 we actually figured out who Shepard was by game 3. The other thing that I have found, which is really interesting and remarkable, is then when you hire voice actors, we spend a lot of time auditioning and finding the right actor. I wrote a character in the trilogy called Garrus, who a lot of people have a lot of love for Garrus. And I think a lot of that has less to do with necessarily what I wrote and more to do with Brandon Keener, the voice actor, who just, it's amazing what, you know, a good actor can do with a dull line. Make us all look better. So that's actually a key part, is finding the right actor, the right voice actors to really bring these people to life in person.
That's a wonderful segue. That's why I was going to come at it. So I agree with all the other comments in regards to, you know, how you can approach it and finding characters and so forth. I was going to jump in at the casting point. You know, they do say that a good cast is like half the writing, right? If you get a good cast, then even a dud line can work. And one of the kind of key things for the kind of game that I do is your ability to swear really well. So high quality profanity. If you're out there, you can swear really well. Maybe it's a feature for you in VO. So, you know, and shouting. You know, in Call of Duty games, a lot of our actors spend a lot of their time shouting. I think Keith Sutherland came out after one of the sessions and said, "Geez, I haven't shouted that much since I was married." You know, like we have them like working like, you know, straight hours in terms of how, you know, calling out, you know, over there on the left, you know. Gary Oldman actually said, which was, he said, "Oh, you know,